You were each given one of these lanyards when you walked in the door, because when you come through those doors, you are transformed. You come from different places. You're each living your individual lives, but every time we gather here, we are actually individual parts of a larger whole. We live in a world that makes us try to forget this. We live in a world that would say you get to live your life however you want and nobody can judge you for it, and that's true. But it's also true that we have the ability to transform each other's lives, and God has the ability to make us larger and bigger and stronger than any one of us can be individually. But it's only by seeing ourselves as parts of a larger whole. And that requires work. That requires practice. It also requires a lot of honesty. If faith is an individual project that's just for you and you alone, then you get to decide what you want to hear and what you don't. You get to decide what is pleasing to you and what's going to help you with your faith, and you get to ignore or discard all the stuff you'd rather not think about. But our Bible stories today show us, they tell us, and the way Della read them was just so beautifully rendered, that life is hard. And in life there is loss, there is hardship, there is sorrow and tragedy. And if I'm just allowed to hear whatever I want to hear when it comes to my own faith journey, it might be really tempting to me to ignore those really heavy, dark, difficult things. But our faith, our scriptural tradition, our faith tradition, our God, they make certain promises to us. And one of those promises is that if we can be honest about our uncertainty, if we can live into our pain and our loss, our frailty, our insecurity, our weakness, if we can walk with God and continue loving God with all we are and loving our neighbors as ourselves, God will transform us into something new. That's what both of our stories have in common today. Both what Jeremiah says about the jars. We are all clay in the hands of God the potter. Sometimes what feels like death and danger to us is God simply reforming things, making us into something new. The story of Ruth and Naomi is one that we tell a lot in this sanctuary, but today we focus on a different aspect of that story. Naomi, meaning pleasant one, so much loss, so much pain, so much heartache. She goes to her hometown of Bethlehem and says, "Do not call me pleasant one. Call me Mara, call me bitter, for God has dealt bitterly with me." So much has happened to her that she sees no sign of hope or love or joy. Just call me bitter. I will be Mara for the rest of my days. But in both these stories, God brings transformation. I don't know how well you know the story of Ruth and Naomi, but I'll tell you this. The part that Della just read is the only part in the entire story where Naomi is actually referred to as Mara. She goes before her friends and says, "God has dealt so bitterly with me. Just call me bitter the rest of my days." But then she goes about living her life, committing to Ruth, Ruth committing to her. These two women who are not blood relatives, they don't even owe each other an obligation of law anymore. They're basically strangers, but they've committed to one another for their mutual survival. And out of that commitment, by serving and loving one another day after day, Naomi actually doesn't live a bitter life. You can turn to the end of the book of Ruth and you will see she's still called Naomi. She's still called pleasant. And this woman Ruth, who she owes nothing to and who owes nothing to her, she helps her get married again. She marries this really strapping young man named Boaz. Ooh, Boaz. They have a child. And even though Naomi is not blood relatives with this family, they name Naomi as the baby's grandmother. Naomi is not bitter all of her days. It's through this practice of commitment, of committing to this relationship, committing to mutual service and love. God refuses to leave us at our lowest point, on our darkest day. God refuses to say it's all over and all ended in tragedy. No, God says commit, find this little pathway forward, find a way of doing something new in your life, and you will be the pleasant one for the rest of your days. Same thing with Jeremiah. Jeremiah looks out at the nation of Israel that has been massacred and demolished, that has been torn apart, and the elites have been sold into slavery, and the poor people have been crushed. And Jeremiah says, this is not the end. You are merely pots in the hands of God the potter. God may be smashing and demolishing everything you know, but it's only for the sake of remaking it. The message to Israel is recommit. Recommit to your covenant with God, and God will make you whole once again. And that's exactly what happened. Commitment is a spiritual practice that promises transformation, and it's one that is easiest for us to find when we are at our lowest points. It's ironic because it's the exact moment in our lives that we're not looking to do anything new. When we have a broken heart, when we've experienced a major loss, we're not looking to start something new then. We would like to grieve, please. We would like to sit with our feelings for a while. Thank you very much. But it's that exact moment that committing to something may transform your life. It may transform the name you are called. It may transform the work you do. It may transform the way you are known in your community. Practicing commitment to a person, to a cause, to a place, to a committee, practicing commitment is how we grow. It's how we grow in our faith. And just a quick demonstration from our tree. Our tree friend here, this purple circle is known as the cambium cell layer. So this is the one part of the entire tree that grows. That's the only thing that the cambium cell layer does. It receives these hormones from the tree called auxins, A-U-X-I-N-S. It receives these hormones called auxins, and it uses those hormones to develop new wood in the trunk. And it grows. And from this wonderful little book that I've been reading, The Hidden Life of Trees, written by Peter Wohlleben, on page 96, I read this really interesting thing about this work, about what trees do. And here's why it's important, particularly for our community. Trees grow faster as they grow older. A tree that is several hundred years old will grow several centimeters faster than a tree that is younger than itself. We live in a world that says we are all individuals, we all get to choose our own path, we all get to decide what matters to us and what doesn't, what am I willing to hear, what am I not. And this same society tells us it's when you're young that you matter the most. The younger you are, the more active you're expected to be. Older folks, you're welcome to go and retire. You're welcome to start calming down and slowing down and quieting down, which is true. I'm in no position to tell anyone how to live your life. You do what pleases you. But know this, the older you are, the faster you grow. It doesn't feel true physically. We know that as our physical bodies age, we get more pains, we slow down physically, we can't move the way we used to, no matter how many bicycle rides and marathons and mountains we used to climb. But spiritually, it's the inverse of that. Our spiritual growth is actually happening faster as we get older. We are not actually allowed to stay in this narrative that says life is disappointing and cruel, and the more you experience it, the more loss you have, and the more bitter you become. We're not actually allowed to stay in that place very long, because you are God's people. And you have an entire world of younger people around you who need to see that, sure, life has its downs. Life can be hard. We all experience death and loss, misfortune, injustice. But if you are willing to commit your life to something, if you are willing to commit your life to a person, or to love, or to light, or to justice, or to music, If you are willing to commit to something, God does not leave you in that hard spot. God simply reforms you into something new. And for all your days, you'll be known as pleasant. If this work of commitment doesn't sound like it means much to you right now, I invite you to think about what it might mean to your younger neighbors, to see someone transformed, living their best life, all the years of their life. I invite you to stand if you're comfortably able and join me in singing our hymn, number 550.